The wheel of time turns and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again.
Welcome to Through the Glass Columns, a Wheel of Time read-along podcast. Each week, we will be reading, discussing, and digesting a small selection from Robert Jordan's fantasy opus. This quest is led by Tylor, a true Wheel of Time warrior.
I have all stories, ages that were and that will be. And I'll be joined by Greg, a complete novice to the Wheel of Time.
The Wheel of Time and the wheel of a man's life turn alike without pity or mercy.
Join us each week as we read the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time, traveling deeper and deeper through the glass columns.
But what does that even mean?
No. You don't get to find out yet.
Wait, Tylor, I know what that means now.
Yeah, no, you really don't.
Hello. Welcome back to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly read-along Wheel of Time podcast. I'm Greg. This is Tylor. That's all we have time for. Tylor, how are you today?
I'm doing really good. I kind of like this introductory style from Greg. Write in letter campaign if you also want to shave about a minute and a half off the beginning of every episode Greg introduces. I thought we had good chapters this week. What did you think, Greg?
I also thought we had good chapters, and I just promised you before I hit record a slight story. So I sat down and did my reading, and I read the first chapter and very much enjoyed it. And then I was like, oh, I got some things to do. I don't know if I have time to squeeze in the second chapter. And I was like, but I want to keep reading. So I read the second chapter, and I was like, oh no, I have like 5 pages left. I don't know if I have time for this. And then I was like, well, let me make my notes, because not much will change in the last 5 pages. Like nothing like giant could happen. And so I made all my notes and then put the book down for, I think, like 8 hours. Like it was most of my day. And then I was like, oh, I got to read those last 5 pages. And I was like, what? Are you kidding me? Like there is something dramatic. I mean, it's even down to like the last 3 pages, I think. And there's not a lot of warning other than that second chapter title. Of course, we are talking about chapter 52, Need. And in particular, I'm talking about chapter 53, The Price of a Departure, which I'm going to go ahead and give Robert Jordan credit for a misdirect, because that sounded like something bad was going to happen. And we'll keep it vague till we discuss that chapter for you chapter splitters. But it was a surprise last twist on my reading. So I just wanted to share that it was a very funny time to do something I'd never done before, which is walk away before the chapter was over.
That's amazing. I hope you do it more often, only at the most inopportune times. That is what I dream for you as a podcast co-host. I don't want to dive too much into that chapter because, as you mentioned, many of our readers have not gotten there. Before we get into our summary of Need, I just wanted to take kind of a pace check for you. Because last week, I think where we were at is we were starting to feel some momentum, but it also felt like we weren't kind of up to speed for how late in the book we were. Has that changed this week? Because it's not the most resolve-y of 2 chapters, but I think there's some really interesting stuff.
Yes. Again, I would say the second chapter felt like that. Okay, final 100 pages, which we are now in. I think I have like 93 pages left in my edition. We're gonna get moving, and also in that it signaled some time had passed as well. And I thought 52 was the kind of other register of end of books, which is like, let's do some big different things that you weren't expecting. And I found both to be fulfilling, even if the first one didn't necessarily have that momentum you were just asking about.
Okay.
It was like big and interesting and fulfilling, but it wasn't like what I was looking for, right? There's
Totally.
the things I expect and then the surprises. And it's, depending on my mood, I like one more than the other. And in this case, I think the surprise like was great and it was a nice diversion. And then because the second chapter we read was more of that, here's what you need, let's get this going. I definitely felt fulfilled and happy this week. How did you feel? I mean, it's all a moot point because you know exactly what's going on and how much we have left and all that. So But how did you feel?
I actually kind of had the opposite reaction of you. And I think, as you said, sometimes you want one thing, sometimes you want the other. I very, very rarely want things dying on screen in my reading. And so that's the tiniest of spoilers to chapter 53. But give me the less actiony of the two options. I'll usually pick it, which means my preference of the two chapters was chapter 52, Need. Nynaeve is in Teleron Riode, thinking that she is angry that Egyanin is a Seanchan, but also somehow more mad at herself that she likes Egyanin in spite of it. She is in the heart of the stone when Egwene and two wise ones arrived, Amis and Bear. She finds herself in an armor dress and is chastised by the wise ones for having uncontrolled thoughts that are causing her wardrobe to change. They all seem, or at least Egwene does, misty from half sleeping while riding, because it is the morning in the Waste. You will note that we are on opposite ends of the continent, and so the time change is pretty significant. Egwene, it turns out, has not quite perfected the technique of half sleeping, and so as a result, she is much mistier than the other wise ones. And they all explain the situation in the Waste, particularly focusing on the frustration that Moraine is feeling and not being able to really interact with Rand effectively. And Egwene worries that she doesn't know how she's supposed to look after Rand. And Nynaeve gives her the best advice she can, which is to tell Rand to read what Elaine wrote, which I thought was hilarious. Nynaeve then asks if it's possible to look into Amathera's dreams and determine if she is a dark friend, but they are told that is too dangerous. And then Nynaeve asks whether or not they can bring Amathera into the world of dreams, and she is told that is evil. When Nynaeve keeps pressing them to do these things anyways, she's told that she is acting like a girl, and the Aiel change her hair to look like how the little girls in the Aiel Waste braid their hair, but Nynaeve eventually dismisses it as simply being, she must have had another stray thought. She then starts kind of asking how she could potentially find help. And she finds, and first off, she is told that the way that she asks makes it sound like a demand. And then, second, because they believe it will help Rand, they agree to help her and tell her that there is a way to search for what she is looking for. The key is need. She must find what she needs, and she must make each step on this path blind, meaning that if there is anything dangerous where she is going, she will not know that it is coming. They agree that in 7 days they will meet again, and Nynaeve is cautioned to not do anything too dangerous, which Nynaeve doesn't respond especially well to. At this point, Nynaeve begins to take some precautions in that she changes her hair and makes herself and her clothing look different. And then she focuses on Need, where she arrives in a bedroom where a nude woman is being held in bonds of air by one of the Black Aja that she recognizes. Nynaeve realizes that the woman being held is Amathera, and thus she must not be a dark friend. She closes her eyes and shifts again, and she is worried that she was noticed by the Black Aja, but is glad to know Amathera's situation. Nynaeve looks around, and she is in an exhibition room where she sees a woman in a misty dress looking at something in a display case and then looking at something else across the room. Before Nynaeve can really respond or do much else, she realizes in kind of a dam break moment that she has seen this woman before, and it is the woman who altered her memory through compulsion in a previous chapter. And as she starts to get angry and begins to act like she is going to lash out at this person, Birgitte arrives and pops her out somewhere else where she cool down. Birgitte warns her that the woman she has just encountered is Moghedien, and that previously in the Waste she had seen as Modian, and both of these are Forsaken, who could potentially cause serious problems for Nynaeve. We learned that the people who souls are tied to the Horn of Valir don't die in the way that most mortals do. Instead, their souls wait in the world of dreams, and they are told not to interfere with the rest of the world. But it becomes clear that Birgitte is willing to do so, even though there is a great risk to her. At this point, Gaidel Kane, a man from the stories, arrives, and we learn that he is a bit older than Birgitte, that he always first hates her and then they fall in love, and he argues that they should not do anything because they cannot influence the waking world unless they are born again or the horn blows. On the other hand, Brigitte argues that they should help because they don't want the world to fall into shadow. And we learned that Brigitte has had encounters with Moghedien before, who promised that if Brigitte got in her way, she would do something horrible that would make her weep alone as long as the wheel turns. Yet Brigitte will do what she can, but eventually she has to leave along with Gaidal. Nynaeve then starts channeling. She is angry enough and heads back where she sees a seal to the Dark One's prison, changes her appearance to hide once again, and then looks at what Moghedien was looking at other than the seal to the Dark One's prison, and sees bracelets and a collar that radiate an aura of sadness. Suddenly, Nynaeve is woken by Elaine, and as she is waking, Nynaeve wonders why Moghedien is hiding these items from the Black Aja. They eventually discuss this and conclude that she must be hiding herself from the Black Aja and is not working in concert with them, which gives them an advantage against both groups because they seemingly don't know about one another. They also discuss what the artifact could be and realize that a collar and bracelets must be an Adam for a man. They then crack a plan for how to get the collar and the seal and Amathera, and then suddenly there is a commotion out in the hallway. They see all three of the men who have been guarding their door, all taking credit for knocking someone out. Egyanin sees him and immediately recognizes him, shouting and saying they should slit his throat, and that he is a Sean-chan who could cause her significant trouble and may have known that she let the Suldam free. It's also worth noting that Egyanin isn't wearing much, and both Bail Domon and Julin seem interested in her, but she is only interested in Bail Domon. It turns out that Elaine has an idea of how they can get into the palace, and the girls begin to plan. That was a longer summary than I kind of expected it to be. What did you take away from this chapter?
Dodging that question, just to pick up on that last very Robert Jordan moment, I was laughing because when I was reading that, the women are described as wearing their shifts, right? They take off their main dresses and are left in a shift. And I don't go to enough Ren fairs to know this vocabulary well. So I'd always kind of pictured those as like the old-timey nightgown, like, high collar all the way down to the floor. And so then when the kind of gross men are like, I was like, oh, I think I'm picturing this entirely wrong, that this is somehow revealing and not like a burlap sack, like I'm picturing.
I think it is revealing in like the medieval sense, right? We're probably seeing like some lower thigh and definitely some arms and maybe even a collarbone. It is. Ooh.
Yeah, all right. Slow down. We don't want that explicit tag. So I thought this was a really enjoyable chapter, and like I alluded to, it was surprising. And so I was not expecting Brigitte in particular to show up. And I think I've used this analogy before, but it always feels to me like when we start to deal with those old heroes, it's like in Harry Potter when you start to learn about the parents, right? And it's like, oh, everything that happened in that generation greatly impacts this. And it's slightly different because it's like everything that happened in the last generation and the one before that and the one before that and the one, like it's all of them at once across deep time. But it's really interesting and engaging. And I think I am still, as a new reader, trying to figure out the relationship between kind of those heroes and the Forsaken, right? Because there's a relationship there. They all are kind of familiar with each other. But I also think we get some real clear messages this chapter and probably 10 times before this, but I picked up on them here that, like, yes, they come back and things repeat, but they are different every time. Like, I believe it's Kane and Brigitte saying they always end up together. Or no, not Brigitte, Mordian.
You got it right.
No, okay.
So Brigitte and Gaidal Kane end up together.
Yep.
Moghedien was the name that you were searching for, but that is one of the Forsaken.
Right. And so, and I have so many questions related to those. So Moghedien is a Forsaken. Moghedien is a Forsaken who we have seen before, but this is like their introduction, essentially. Like we haven't had them named before.
That is correct.
And it's very clear that this is not Lanfear. And so a long time ago, when the most beautiful woman in the world, lied to them, was that Lanfear, or is this confirmation that was Moghedien who kind of went in and manipulated them?
The one who went in and cast compulsion on them earlier in this book, the one who walked into the Three Plum Court and got them to tell her the information and walked out, that was Moghedien. I'm pretty sure that is her only appearance thus far in the series. Every other most beautiful woman, I'm pretty sure, has been.
and Moghedien has some clear dialogue that I appreciated, where it's like, oh, I'm not as powerful here as Lanfear is, and so
Yeah.
it's like, okay, we can understand that these two are separate. And then Asmodean,
Yeah.
who is also a Forsaken,
Correct.
has been around before. So Moghedien alludes to the fact that we've met Asmodean in our kind of Teleron Riod shenanigans.
Yes. So recall the first time that we saw Birgitte in this book was when Nynaeve was following, I think, Amos in the Aiel Waste, and they were in the world of dreams in the Waste. And right before Nynaeve started to kind of talk to Birgitte, she spotted someone sneaking into Roydian, and then Birgitte stopped her from going after that. Birgitte is saying that that mystery man was one of the first, Asmodean.
Okay, and so these are some more Forsaken. We could have some angel talk again. I mean, I think these names are all reminiscent of other gods or other deities, which works
I
pretty
think
well.
Moghedien might be Arthurian, but yes.
Yeah. Sorry, from very different kind of legendary sources.
Yeah.
So that's all my smart questions. The silly thing I want to share, just in case people respect me by accident, is I will say every time Brigitte's name appears, I think Bridget. Like, it's just like my mind
It took me a
scans it
long
as
time.
Bridget. So I have started to, in my head, for whatever reason, what helps me remember is singing the line from Rent, which is about her Akita Evita. But in my head, I go, it's her Akita Brigida, just to remind myself that that's the rhyme. That's the sound of the name. I don't know why, but it's what I do every single time now. So it's just in my head.
I 100% love that. We've talked a few times before about one of my loves in fantasy, which is when a character doesn't understand something, but we do because we understand the world better than the character does. And the moment where Nynaeve's hair gets turned into the braids and she doesn't know what's going on, but everyone else in the scene does, including us, that was my favorite moment from the early section of this chapter, right? If we're thinking about this is a chapter that really centers around Nynaeve exploring new and different. It's kind of fun that one of the weird things she encounters we get. I really appreciated that.
Uh, I don't know that I appreciate it as much as you did, but I will say I liked the theme that was a part of. Like, everybody is infantilizing Nynaeve, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's like, it's pretty dangerous. You shouldn't do this. And I liked how angry Nynaeve was getting about it, because she's like, I was the wisdom, I was the head of the women's council, and
Yeah.
it's like you appreciate why she feels that matters, while I at least 100% sided with the other people. Like, that does not matter. Emmons Field
Yeah.
is not the world. You are meddling with forces you cannot possibly comprehend, so you need to be very careful. And
Yeah.
it is in this chapter as well that the wise ones point out that they've been monitoring Perrin too. So it's like,
I think that was
right?
Birgitte points out that she's been monitoring
Perdita.
Perrin.
Okay. So it's like all of these things that our characters think are very smart and they're doing
Yeah.
have gotten all the forces of good arrayed to watch them carefully. And so I think that's notable that they are in trouble.
I think you pointed out how fun it is to kind of see Nynaeve repeatedly get like frustrated by, honestly, her own shortcomings and unwillingness to ask for help. The one moment in that rubbed me slightly the wrong way is when she seems to like accept advice from the wise ones that she doesn't take from Egwene. And I think that in previous books, we had been in Egwene's POV and been like, why in the world are she and Nynaeve arguing all the time? And this, I think, is a really good example of the dynamic between those two characters and how it plays out as Nynaeve thinking, I'm the older one, I should know better, and Egwene thinking, I'm the one who studied this, I should know better, and they just get in a kind of loop of anger.
And yet it all feels right to the character. So there's the
Yeah.
compliment, because I did start by making fun of Robert Jordan's love of the female form. And like, I do feel like these characters feel really well drawn. And so in a moment like that, which could easily slip into frustration, it just works, and it
Yeah.
kind of is delightful. So I loved that moment.
So I think the
Or
one
those
other
moments.
yeah. I think the one other thing that I
Sorry.
have at the beginning of this chapter is we get a really nice kind of timeline matchup, right? One of the tricky things about Robert Jordan is, as you mentioned earlier, sometimes some of his chapters like leap forward in time where it feels like other ones all take place in one day. And so it's really nice every once in a while to get something that just links this is when all of the events are happening chronologically. And the note that both of these plot lines will be wrapped up within the next 7 days, I feel like is something I just wanted to put a pin on. We can kind of say these things are happening more or less simultaneously to one another. And that means at the beginning of the next book, we don't have to worry about like who's catching up to who or what have you. Yay, I guess is what I'm saying. No timey-wimey nonsense to deal with in this.
I was just going to reference Doctor Who, and then you did it first. So I was just going to say, I've been watching the new season of Doctor Who, delayed. I'm behind the times, and there have been some great ticking clocks. And in the official podcast, the writers talked about like how great it is to just start a clock ticking in an episode of Doctor Who, and
Yeah.
okay, in an hour that landmine will go off, or the Leap Glorps will fall from the Shabba Shabbas, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
In typical Doctor Who, and I do agree that that's really useful here. I did it immediately what you just said. I was like, okay, this book is 7 more days, and then we're done, right? We're
Yeah.
roughly done anyway.
7 more days immediately bumps me back to The Ring, which was the first horror movie I ever really got into. But that's not what we're going to talk about. At this point, Nynaeve starts leaping forward with me. Is there anything before that you wanted to make sure we talked about, or?
Nope.
No.
I actually, my main note is the 7 days ticking clock. It just felt so prominent. So you got it.
Excellent. So then once again, we can just note that Robert Jordan loves naked women and move on from the entire scene with Amathera. Apparently she's not a dark friend. And then we get the introduction of 2 characters, right? We get Moghedien primarily seen just kind of in passing and then described by Birgitta. And we get the introduction of Birgitta. And this is where I was a little bit surprised, is I remembered this as the chapter of, oh, they figure out where they're going. I didn't really remember this as the chapter where we learn a whole lot of intriguing details about the heroes of the Horn and the world of dreams and a bunch of things that have only been kind of lightly hinted at. We get a big old exposition dump less than 100 pages from the end of this book. How did that land for you?
I think generally well, although I think I understood very little of it, right? And so, how here are some of the key takeaways, and then you buttress those with either the mistakes I've made or what else I should have noted.
Yeah.
But it seemed to me really important that we're getting this message. I actually thought of like Jedi spirits in Star Wars. It's like they're always there when you're ready to listen to them, and there's this sense that Brigitte is always there watching and trying to influence events, but really powerless, right?
Yeah.
We get that she is 100% powerless unless the horn gets blown again in the physical world. There's nothing these heroes can do unless the horn gets blown again. And then in the dream world, it's like, but I'm here in the dream world. I also can't do much here, right? There's really just nothing they can do. They can witness, they can watch, and in this case have a small conversation, but certainly can't be a force to rescue them. Although I have a question about that, but that's largely correct.
Yeah, I would say they cannot influence the real world. I would say they may not influence the world of dreams. And Brigitte seems to be breaking that rule, right? So I wouldn't rule out the possibility that Brigitte could help them in the world of dreams, but doing so seems to have some consequence for her.
That's exactly what my sub question was. So Kane comes in and is like, I mean, does he call them the precepts or something like that? It's like there's rules, you can't break them.
I believe even in the previous book we had run into him vaguely alluded to, and he said something like the precepts. So yes, I think that's right.
Yeah. And so I think you answered my question, but I'm going to ask it again. I understood those to be essentially guidelines or rules of practice when we can, like, they are not hard and fast rules. And I think you just kind of confirmed that what comes to mind there is in American politics in the last decade or so, it's been like, we have all these rules that we all follow. And then it's like, But what if there's a guy who doesn't and we
Yeah.
can't handle it and it feels like uh-oh, it seems like we're tracking that way. Although at least in this case it seems to be somebody with good motivations.
I think that is 100% correct. It feels like there are hard and fast rules that you must obey, and there is absolutely no one who enforces those hard and fast rules that you must obey.
Yeah.
I think the only other kind of note I had in the Brigida conversation is you alluded to this a little bit earlier, but I think the idea of, I think we had talked before about people being reborn over and over again. And sometimes, like with the dragon, they might face like similar things in different lives. But I think this is the clearest confirmation we've gotten that something about like the soul that repeats stays the same, right? We learn that Brigitte always has some characteristics, and we learn that Gaidel always has some characteristics, and they always interact with one another in kind of a template for a story almost. That I find really interesting because it makes me start to wonder things like how similar is Rand to Luz Theron if they are the same person spun out, in the same roughly distance as it seems like Brigitte from her last birth. Or, I might be wondering questions like if Matt and Perrin are reborn or they have the old blood, what does that mean about what their ancestors once did? Were they also heroes doing similar things to what Matt and Perrin? And so I didn't really have much of a takeaway for Brigitte and Guy Dalkane. I think it's an interesting story that they are reliving over and over, but I found kind of the implications of that for the world building potentially really interesting. And I'm curious what you thought about kind of all of the new layers that we've gotten, not just to Teleron Riode here, but also kind of the idea of rebirth in the wheel.
I was definitely thinking a lot back to the kind of woven weaving
Yeah,
metaphors, and when that first came up, God, like 3 years ago on this podcast. I think we've only been doing it 2 years, but it
too. Yeah,
feels like 3 years ago. When I talked about Melville using a similar metaphor, and he has the kind of steady strings and then the pattern of the shuttle that goes up and down,
yeah,
through the strings in a different pattern to create the pattern of the weaving. And then his is the baton that compresses the weaving together could come in at a different angle. And that's where chance intervenes in our lives. And this feels like the chance to me, right? That
yeah.
like we have generally a set pattern that's going to come every time. And largely will match, but there's just this little bit of chance each time, this little bit of wiggle room that may dramatically change some of those events. So I like that. I think it's also a savvy way for a writer to say, not everything is predestined, that there's
Yeah.
still an effect to whatever every character chooses across this.
Yeah, I like that a lot, and I think it's a good summation of a big messy section of this chapter, right? There is a lot of detail that goes into giving us that kind of interesting bit of cosmology, but I really enjoyed it. I don't know whether it was too exposition-y for you, but I really dug it. Um, I guess then the last section of this chapter, we know what we are after, and we know the girls have a plan, right? We find out that there is another seal of the Dark One's prison. We are rapidly collecting them. This is either the fourth or fifth of 7 that we have encountered so far.
Hmm.
I think fourth. And we also learn that there are what amounts to an Adam for men. It's worth noting to help us kind of clear up the vocabulary, the internet has dubbed this artifact the sad bracelets. So that is the easiest way to refer to the sad bracelets. What was your thought either on the reveal of those items or anything else kind of in the end section of this chapter?
I think the most intriguing question is that now we seemingly have a Sean Chan on our team, and we now have somebody with or some kind of Sean Chan adjacent technology. That's intriguing to me.
Yeah.
The idea, I mean, we knew from the get-go that this was going to be a Terra Angreal that posed a great threat to Rand. So this just kind of makes sense as what it is. I guess just want to save a little room that there is just a little bit of guesswork here still. So
Yeah.
there's a gap there that this could do something else, that they might be reading this wrong. So those were kind of my key takeaways. I did have in my notes to ask you how many seals we were up to, but this one is intact.
Correct.
So, and I think it's important, when you talk about seals, I think of seals on an envelope. And so, like, they are on something that is closed, but these are like just whole artifacts that are around, and when they
Yes.
break, they're not like opening anything except the kind of spiritual realm prison thing. So
That is
I
correct.
think just visually I had to kind of remind myself, like, this is just like a yin yang black and white cookie
I,
piece of stone, and it could crack open, and that's bad.
I was literally going to refer to it as an unbreakable black and white cookie that you might accidentally break. I think that is exactly the shape and size that is being described. Um, Last thing in this chapter, Egyanin gets two interesting call out moments, right? One is when a Shan is knocked out by the men and she asks for him to be killed immediately. I think we are meant to read that as being the seeker of the truth that she encountered much earlier in this book. But I thought that reaction was telling of where she is at. And the other note that I had here is Egyanin and Bail Domon apparently dig one another. Make of that what you will. Any thoughts on Egyanin and her kind of couple moments in the sun at the end of this chapter?
Not really. It felt to me like Robert Jordan was worried he'd given us too much exposition. So it's like, and here's a little action. Those
Yeah.
of you who want some fast actions. So I didn't care that much for the kind of somebody's dead in the hall. Everybody takes credit. It just kind of
Yeah.
okay. But I do think I can tell Egyanin is actively getting that promotion to an A tier character that we really need to care more about. And part of that is by establishing some relationships with someone like Bail Doman. So we have to track these things.
That's absolutely correct. Now let's see how quickly a character becomes A tier when there are 11 more books in the series. Chapter 53, The Price of a Departure. Oil, candles, and food are all in short supply in the two rivers. Perrin hears a complaint from Senbui about rations, and Perrin longs for the days when he was once excluded from these types of difficult conversations. We learn that the siege has been going on for several days, and the Aes Sedai only heal those with the worst wounds, and that arrows are regularly recovered in order to maintain supplies, but they can't always be recovered in the night. We learn that the Trollocs have been attacking day and night, both trying to penetrate the defenses and occasionally just seeking to find where the weaknesses are. Perrin apparently has been asking the same questions over and over again, and many of the men begin worrying about him and whether or not he is getting enough sleep. We also learn Perrin overhears that the women are on half rations but don't want the men to know about it. Bran at this point tells Perrin that he needs to sleep, but Perrin deflects, and at this point Daniel arrives saying that a messenger has come to the village and has said that he's going to speak to him only. Fael and Aram both follow Perrin, and we learn that Aram has not spoken to either of his grandparents since picking up the spear, and he seems to have placed all of his dedication to the way of the leaf with dedication to Perrin. He follows him along with 10 other guards who follow Perrin at all times because of fears about the White Walks. When Perrin arrives, he finds a severely wounded man who says he must get Perrin Goldeneyes. And when Perrin identifies himself as Perrin Goldeneyes, he is told, "We are coming." And then the man immediately dies. We're told that he was found 3 to 4 miles south of the village. And Perrin worries that it's a family who is trying to get into the village after not arriving soon enough. At this point, Perrin stumbles, and Fael insists that he must rest. But then they get news that there is something coming out of the Westwood. He is told this by someone who calls him Lord Perrin, and Perrin tells him not to call him that. He then says that it must not be an attack, but Perrin refuses to sleep and goes to see what it is. Apparently, Tomas has called for Perrin specifically because he knows that Perrin can see well in the dark, and when Perrin looks out, he sees Loyal carrying Gaul. Eventually, both of them get to the village, and one of them, Gaul, is quite injured, and both of them have lost most of their weapons, and it seems like they've had a very difficult travel. Perrin admonishes Loyal, who says that they were able to seal the Waygate, and we learn that they outran a number of Trollocs, and we also learn that whenever Gaul tries to resist being tended to, Chiad threatens to make him Gai'Shane, which I find hilarious. Loyal comments on how long he's been out of the steading and how it's wearing on him, and he also reports that there are enough camps in the area for there to be several thousand Trollocs and perhaps 50 Murdrim. At this point, Lord Luke arrives, saying that there are less than 1,000 Trollocs in the area, and he has yet another Murdrill head in a bag. Gaul agrees with Loyal, but Luke says that he spent more days in the Blight than all of them combined, and so he would know. And Fael insists that Loyal will have to carry Perrin to sleep if Perrin won't go on his own, and so eventually Perrin does agree to sleep. He promises Fael that he will undress before he does so, and then he immediately does. We then cut to Perrin in the Wolf Tree. He first sees a number of visions, first of Egwene afraid while a number of women kneel to her, including Nynaeve and Elaine, then Mat bound naked with a spear and a medallion, and then Rand in rags with a bandage over his eyes. At this point, Perrin leaves visions and is in normal Teleron Riode and begins first notices that he is in blacksmith gear and he has to focus to dismiss the hammer, despite the fact that he thinks the axe is what he needs. He then begins scouting all of the Trolloc camps, trying to count how many of them there are, and also comes upon the site where the Tuatha wagons were attacked, causing him a significant amount of pain. He then goes to Devon Ride, which shows signs of gathering together, but there are only enough Trollocs there to pen them in, and the same seems to be true in a couple of other villages, but Terran Ferry is nearly completely destroyed, except for the fact that the ferry is still functional, and Perrin thinks this might give him an opportunity to get someone out to get a message to Morgaze. At this point, he ducks to pick up a doll in the village and barely avoids being shot by an arrow. Perrin then spots Slayer, who seems worried, and Perrin stays still and sets a trap for Slayer, eventually hitting him with an arrow, and Slayer fades from the dream, and Perrin wakes. When he wakes, he hears Tinker music, thinking that they are trying to keep the village in high spirits, and then he hears a commotion downstairs, and when he gets downstairs, he hears one of the boys say that Lord Luke has fled the village, seemingly looking like he was holding his side. At this point, Perrin realizes that Slayer and Luke must be the same person, despite them looking nothing alike, and he tells the boy that if Luke ever gets back into the village, he will be put under guard immediately. Perrin then goes downstairs and sees Loyal taking notes on his adventure, and Fael admonishes him for not sleeping, but he asks about Luke, who apparently was injured, and he tells Fael that he wants her to carry a message to Caemlyn, escorted by Bane and Chiad. Chiad seems anxious to leave Gaul, and Fael says that she will not have to, which causes Perrin to be surprised because they are enemies, not seemingly people who like each other. And then Perrin tells Fael that they can hold out long enough, even though he knows that isn't true. And then Loyal almost gives up the lie when he arrives and gives Fael his manuscript, telling her that there are great publishers in Caemlyn and that she should fly free like a falcon. At this point, Perrin implores her to go, and she agrees to go for a price, a wedding tonight. He says that they must wait because of the traditions of the two rivers, but Fael being Fael, she has already checked with all of the women in town and gotten an exception to the rules, and so they agree and are married an hour and a half later. She uses her given name, and he worries the entire time he is saying his oaths that he is going to die while he sends Fael away to be safe. So a lot happened in those last 5 pages, Greg. You probably should have read this chapter all in one go. What did you think of it once you did get to the big twists and changes at the end?
I thought this was a great chapter. I thought again, where I'm gonna say lesser author would have dwelled on like the siege and this wave of Trollocs hit at this time and that. It's like instead, let's just kind of skip over all that and talk about what happens in a siege. Is the supplies run low and you have to worry about kind of each little interaction. So on the whole, I liked the chapter a lot. I'm still a little sad Loyal's adventure happened off screen, quote unquote. And while he returned and I was happy and it's like, oh, that's good news. I'm a little worried that he gave his book away. I'm not feeling so good. That feels a little like well, any example I could give is kind of a spoiler to whatever thing I'm referencing. But when a character gives away their prized possession, that is a clear indication the author does not want that prized possession on that character's person for some kind of deliberate reason.
It does feel like Loyal is announcing that he's going to retire tomorrow, and this is his last peaceful day on the force.
Yeah. Again, I don't want to spoil other things. So it's a little worrisome, but otherwise I liked this chapter a lot. I'll jump to the other big moment and say I feel like this is a little too easy on Lord Luke now, and we've been playing this game in Star Wars world lately where they give you a really clear, obvious like answer to a question, and then you're like, well, I don't know, maybe because that seems so obvious, it has to be something else now, and that's where I was at Lord Luke in this chapter. All the characters take it as immediate confirmation. It seems pretty obvious, so I was like, but is it? Like, let's talk about that. So, but
Okay.
I suspect it is.
I obviously can't confirm anything more than what we've gotten so far, but I kind of want to talk through the details of the Luke and Slayer thing, right? Because the reason that we had most strongly to not associate these characters is that they looked absolutely nothing like one another, right? Slayer, we've basically had lots of comparisons to Lan, and I think at one point you had mentioned Lan's long lost cousin who was potentially lost in the blight during the fall of Malkir. And then we've also talked about Luke, who I think Perrin, even in this chapter, says looks quite a bit like Rand if he had to choose anyone, kind of that red hair, and has implied that he has some kind of royal lineage of some kind. And the thing that makes Perrin so sure in this chapter is that they smell alike. What this makes me wonder is, what does this mean if they are the same person? Is this Luke exhibiting kind of the same ability to mask himself that Nynaeve was showing in the previous chapter, where she takes on another face or some other clothes? Or is there something more going on there? Because it seems that Slayer, at least, is not kind of constantly different guises. It seems to be the same person over and over again, and it's very distinctive.
Yeah, I did bump on there was another reference this chapter about how much he looks like Lan, and I was
Yeah.
like, oh right, kind of a reminder of that potential connection. And so it seems strange if Stalker he hadn't changed his
Slayer.
appearance that he settles on Slayer changes his appearance, he settles on this one, and that's what he always appears as. So it to me feels more like the Matrix with I think they call it your residual self image. Like this is like the default you go to. This is who you see yourself as. And so I think that makes me feel like this is actually who he is without that complication.
Yeah, and I think then the interesting question for Luke is we now feel like he is out of the picture, at least in the waking world for this book, right? He has fled, he is injured. It's possible Slayer makes some sort of dream appearance, but it feels like Robert Jordan is kind of taking that character and saying, we'll deal with him later, right? So I'm
See
curious
you
what
later.
your
See you next
thoughts
book.
are. So you're saying see you next book. I'm curious, do you have any predictions or thoughts on what you think that character's role is going forward? Or are you just like, oh, okay, he's a guy who's elsewhere?
I kind of have put him in he's another Forsaken. We have to deal with the Forsaken to get to the Dark One, and we'll deal with that later. I still feel like, and again, this could just be complete misreading, but I still feel like Lord Luke reads like Worm Tongue to me,
Yeah.
and Slayer reads like Saruman. And so, in that regard, it feels very much for book fans of Lord of the Rings when you kind of conquer Saruman and he disappears, but he then causes a lot more trouble elsewhere later.
Yeah.
So, I suspect we're going to see kind of the oh shoot, we shouldn't have let him go when we did. We should have pursued that
Mm.
then, and there's greater trouble later. That's kind of what this feels like to me.
Okay, I totally buy that. I think other than that, the early part of this chapter you already highlighted does a really good job of kind of laying out the challenges of a siege, right? It lays out all the hard choices that you're making. I think it does that relatively well. The first moment that really stood out to me, aside from just things seem bad, is Aram. Because we get a lot of details about him kind of in just a paragraph or two, but he is in a very different place than where he was the last time we checked in on, right? He is now constantly wearing his sword. He is completely isolated from the other Tinkers, and it seems, I think the way that they phrased it in here is something like Aram had replaced all of his fondness for his people with fondness for Perrin. right? It seems like Perrin has gotten all of his dedication that he was once spreading elsewhere. And that, I think, is maybe not what either of us were predicting the last time we talked about Aura, right? I think you had talked about, like, does he embrace violence or does he eventually reach a point where he steps back from it? This feels like a story about almost it feels like it's leaning into fanaticism to some degree, right? It's someone who's following Perrin to an even stronger degree than the others around him. I'm curious whether this has made you rethink your kind of positioning on where you expect Aram to go later
Um, just want to note, I still have trouble caring about him. I need to do a
on.
better
Okay.
job, but he still just feels kind of secondary. But I think this feels natural to particularly young men growing up, and when they lose their way and have kind of one of their core beliefs challenged, they do latch onto something. We could also talk about U.S. politics in this way,
Mhm.
and some of recent times. But it's like he lost his direction, and the only thing around him that gives him direction is following Heron. And
Yeah.
so that kind of devotion. I think what you're alluding to is we kind of talked about dark side energy last time, and at least if he's following Perrin, Perrin should be able to keep him safe, though
Yeah.
fanaticism, even to a benevolent figure, is dangerous. It's something we should be careful of.
So then we get a message. We are coming. Perrin immediately assumes it's some farmer who is coming into the village. I immediately dismiss that, both because it seems too simple and because it's what the character thought at first. Do you have any thoughts about who this messenger is, what this means for the plot going forward? It feels like this is the hint that you're not meant to get on the first time, which is why it's the perfect thing to ask my first time reader.
Hmm. I'm gonna keep in the Lord of the Rings vein. It felt like the mouth of Sauron, right? Like the kind of a mouthpiece for the larger forces. So we are coming to me just meant the overwhelming, crushing force, right? Like
Okay.
this was the warning. So I took this very negatively that
Okay.
something bad is coming and an overwhelming force will kind of stop this siege pretty soon. Or let me refine that to an overwhelming force thinks they're about to end this siege very
Yeah.
soon. Um, and again, that feeds into then these kind of misgivings I have. Clearly, Perrin's unsettled and wants to send Fail away, and that Loyal stays but sends away his prized possession. Makes me think we've got dark times ahead. If not, the death of somebody like Loyal, then imprisonment where it wouldn't make sense for him to still have his book on him, right? It would be taken away, so they
Yeah.
conveniently send it somewhere else for a bit, something like that.
Okay. I buy that. I'm not even going to ask you any more questions about Loyal because you've already said your Loyal prediction, and I think it's interesting. I instead want to ask you the Aiel question because I had told you earlier one of my projects was to separate Bane and Chiad into Bane and Chiad. And this chapter is maybe our first example of being able to do that, right? Up till this point, it feels like Bane and Chiad have both kind of had like a playful, teasing rivalry with Gaul, and both of them were kind of like disdainful of him, but not necessarily had any negative feelings towards him. Here, we see both of them willing to help him, both of them clearly respectful of him. But at first, it seems like Chiad is almost like pressing him and stopping him from doing anything by threatening him to be made Guy Shane. And then we learn later on in the chapter that she was doing so out of a deep degree of caring for him, possibly even love, when she refuses to leave his side until he is better with Fail. And so that moment of distinguishing Chiad as both kind of the aggressive one who is willing to just kind of say, Gaul, shut up, here's what you need to do, and also the one who seems to be in some degree or another interested in Gaul. I found those to be really kind of telling moments for the Aiel.
Yeah, I think I find myself wishing we had uh ideal point of view chapters
Yeah.
because it is like what you are saying is your project and what you are describing. It's like there's this whole drama going on and
Mhm.
we never get to see it. I think it's a Boy Meets World. Very late in the run of that show, there's somebody who comes like
You're talking
essentially
my
out of the
language
fourth
right now.
wall. Yeah, so I think it's Minkus, right? Minkus comes out of the fourth wall and he's like, we're some of the people who are over there, and kind of
On
gestures
the other
past the
side of the
camera.
wall. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a dumb sitcom gag, but it's like it feels like that. Like there's this whole other drama going on adjacent, parallel to what we're there. And so I think I still have trouble. I appreciate what you're saying about telling them apart, but also just like feeling invested in them as whole complete characters. Because most of the time they are just silently stalking just inside the woods nearby, killing things in productive ways. And so
Yeah.
trying to understand their motivations, and that we have a little bit of a love triangle. Well, not even a triangle here, just an infatuation, and kind of,
Yeah.
oh, Perrin kind of bumbles into potentially separating a couple who are interested in each other, and he
Yeah.
just doesn't even realize it, but neither do we. So if anything, it's a characterization moment for Fail, where she's like, yeah, I took the time to know these people, right, and get used to
Yeah.
them. So
I think then if we're happy with the Aiel because I enjoy them and you are still baffled by them, which is the correct relationship between a first-time reader and a multiple-time reader, it's worth noting. I think then the most interesting other Luke moment we haven't talked about so far is Luke trying to convince the village they have almost won the battle. Which, of course, is our first opportunity to now look back and go, oh, all those times he seemed like a bumbling idiot during planning, maybe that was intentional to get the village to plan poorly. And I think that there's nothing different about this moment than many others. It's just the first time I can flag it that way instead of being like, I can't say anything about that.
And I'll just say worm tongue again, right?
Yeah.
That's what it feels like. He's manipulating along the side. He's that kind of subtle power that is really doing more harm to the cause than perhaps the Trollocs.
Then Perrin falls asleep. Then Perrin has some dreams. Some of them are weird dreams. Egwene is afraid while women around her kneel to her, including Nynaeve and Elaine. Matt is naked and bound, our first naked dude in a while, so at least there's some gender balance there. He has his new items, and Rand is in rags with a bandage over his eyes. This feels like classic random prophecy dreams that Greg hates. But any thoughts on these images because they feel important enough to at least get brought up?
They to me felt like things we will 100% see in the future, right? And
Yeah.
we'll be in those moments, and you'll say, "Greg, remember 10 books ago? That's the thing we saw." And while I do kind of not love that as a thing, these are intriguing images, if nothing
Yeah.
else. So that's fun.
Intriguing images. We've already talked about Luke. Let's talk about Fail. It turns out she and Perrin are in love, and she wants to marry him, and he's willing to do so if it keeps her from what he believes is certain death. I think this is a lovely little scene. I think that it mostly works because of the cognitive dissonance that Perrin is going through at being both happy and thinking he's about to die simultaneously. What did you think of this? Because I think my one maybe complaint about it is it's quick for a relationship that basically started a book and a half ago and didn't really start until the end of that book. Um, I guess what I'm asking is, did this plot line of Perrin and Fail as a whole work for you, or did it feel too rushed for this to be kind of the big payoff at the end of this?
In regards to the actual marriage and all that, 100% worked for me. Like it felt natural. It didn't feel like it betrayed either character. I think the context I felt it more in is just how much of this book has been a push and pull between them,
Mm.
and that it's always kind of come down to Perrin trying to protect Fail, and Fail being like, I don't need you to protect me. And
Yeah.
so I think in that regard, I found the conclusion of that push and pull a little challenging, because
Mm.
I think it's because I feel like Fail got tricked. This is primarily based on, I need you out of here to protect you. And he dresses it up as, you have a particular set of skills. I need to
Yeah.
send somebody I can trust. And so it feels like he tricks her in the end. And I think that feels a little hollow to me. Like I don't like that. I wanted that relationship to evolve into a like
Yeah.
mutual respect. And I don't think this specific moment got quite to that. but that's also me putting a 2024 this is how we tell gender inequality stories now
Yeah.
on a 1993 book somewhere back then. So I think it's like it's okay, but by modern standards I don't think this is I have trouble like thinking they did right by Fail in this moment.
The only reason that I struggle with that characterization, although I think in general I kind of agree with you that it feels like Perrin entering into the marriage from kind of a duplicitous place is not a great start for that relationship. The only reason that I would kind of push back on that slightly is because Fail is actually the one who, one, insists that they get married, and two, has apparently already been asking all of the elders around what it would take to get around the marriage rules to get them quick married. Right. So there's a part of me that's like, he is scheming, but she was also scheming. So it balances out. But on the bad for a relationship scale, she's at like a 3 and he's at like an 8. So I don't know if we can call it tit for tat. That being said, I think I'm both agreeing with you and not minimizing it, but saying it's not bad enough for me to throw out the baby with the bath, which is an uncommon way of phrasing this kind of analysis in 20.
And I think I would just add to that this easily could have been a plot of, oh, we're married now. That's all I ever wanted. I'll hide in the house and wait. And so the fact
Yeah.
that she is going to get a plot and she does get to do something heroic, makes me more positive on it. And it also makes me think these two might spend a book or two apart now, right? Like if she's really going where all the way to the queen, it could be a long time before they're reunited. Although everybody was doing the math of like, oh, 6 weeks,
Yeah.
3 weeks there, 3 back. I was like, oh, it's gonna be a long time before they're reunited.
I just wanted to point out one more kind of oddity in this chapter. Uh, there is a lovely moment in this chapter where Loyal tells Fail that the name Fail is a good fit for her because she is a falcon and she should fly free like a falcon. And immediately after hearing that, Fail chooses not to use the name Fail in her wedding vows. I just thought that was kind of funny, but I did love
That's
that
cool.
line from Loyal.
Yeah, and Fail, we were just talking about how other characters are getting promoted. Fail has made that promotion, and I find myself caring a lot about her. I think I'm excited about this because I don't think she's going off screen. I think we'll get some Fail chapters, and we'll follow that plot line. Would be my potentially wrong prediction for weeks to come.
Everyone either laugh at or smile proudly at Greg. I
And
know what I'm
next
doing.
book, I don't think we'll see her until next book, but I think chapter 4 of the Fires of Heaven will be our first Fail POV chapter.
That is a prediction, sir. I've got nothing else for these chapters. We have 2 chapters next week, and let me tell you, we are in the final stretch of this book with chapter 54 Into the Palace and chapter 55 Into the Deep, in which I think we wrap up at least one of our plot lines for good in this book. Greg, what are you looking forward to? What are you excited about? And how quickly are you going to try to make me read the remaining 5 chapters of this book? And then, you can say the name of the podcast and we can get out of here so you can actually read it.
Well, chapter 4, the next book, has the Aiel symbol as its chapter icon. So I don't think I'm correct, is what I was doing and not listening to you. I'm very excited. Tylor is alluding to the fact that I have pressured him due to, it's the summer months. So like travel is tricky. And it's just the time of year when he and I often fall behind, as I'm sure we hide from you all, but you can immediately tell. So I keep the pressure on because I want to finish this book. And so I hope all our listeners are enjoying this for the summer months. As you are listening to this, it's July. And we'll wrap up this book relatively soon. People again are told that it is recommended you go purchase The Fires of Heaven. We will
carry right on. If not within 1 week, but within a couple weeks, we'll continue right on. And then coming up shortly in August will be our double weeks like we did last August, where you can get episodes covering the second season of the television show, The Wheel of Time. So if you're looking for a time to make up a new email address and get a free trial of Amazon Prime, now might be it. Or if you're going, my go-to tactic, I'm going to an Airbnb for summer vacation in a couple weeks. I'm logging into their smart TV and seeing if they left Amazon Prime logged in, and I'll get those episodes. But those are things coming up. We've already revealed we've banked those television episodes, so you'll have to see what we're so we're like, hey, isn't it crazy how much snow we're getting right now, or whatever we talked about those weeks. But we will continue right on. And now I've rambled on so long, I just really want to say Through the Glass Columns.
So ends another episode of Through the Glass Columns. We thank you for joining us and continuing with us on our quest to cover all of the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time.
This podcast features original content developed by Tylor Orm and Greg Cass and is not in any way affiliated with, associated with, or condoned by the Robert Jordan Estate, Tor Fantasy, or Amazon. All content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please seek out the books from your local bookshop or library and join us as we continue our journey. If you'd like to contact us to share your thoughts or give feedback, you can email us at throughtheglasscolumns@gmail.com or find us on Instagram and Twitter by searching Through the Glass Columns.
Thank you once again for being part of this community. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe to the show, leave us a review wherever you're listening, and recommend this show on your social media to help us grow our community. We look forward to welcoming you back next time through the Glass Columns.